Oh wow. I think this thing's on. Um, if it is, welcome to the Sunday streaming edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to react to an interview that just came out this morning. It's Chad Kassam. He is the interviewee, the founder, owner, CEO, captain of Analog Productions, Acoustic Sounds, many other of those related companies in Salina, Kansas, and Steve Westman, who runs one of the best sort of audiophile discussion and interview channels, is interviewing him about the latest series from Analog Productions. Now, this interview and the subject matter of the interview was frankly a long time coming. So let me give you some of the background. In November of 2025, which was a different year than this one, I think, Chad Kassam did some live demonstrations at some audiophile stores in New York City. And one of the things he announced there was a new series for 2026, which at the time they were calling the Rhino Acoustic Sounds 45 series or something very similar. The implication, well, the reality being that it was a collaboration between Rhino Records, which is a subsidiary of Warner, which manages a lot of the legacy artists, aka the old artists, and Analog Productions, one of Chad's companies. And they released a pretty big list of records that they wanted to put out on that series. Now, it was never officially announced in November. The only people that were able to see it were the people who went to that store in New York. And I'm trying to find the original list, but that isn't really working. And so people waited and waited, as people in the audiophile community of one sort or another are used to. Promises about deadlines are made, they're rarely kept, and the fault is rarely on the shoulders of the announcee. I'll get to that a bit later. So we kept hearing, oh, it will be the formal announcement. The official announcement will be in late November. And then late November became early December, and early December became mid January. But here we are, and the announcement is out. So here's where it gets even trickier. So the name of the series has been changed. From the Rhino 45 series to now the Analog Productions or Acoustic Sounds 40, because this year is the 40th anniversary of Chad founding the mother company of all of his companies. And so it's really still in collaboration with Warner, aka Rhino, aka back to Warner, but that name has been taken out of it. And now it's 40 titles, mainly in the rock genre and rock adjacent, a few soul and jazz fusion albums celebrating 40 years of Acoustic Sounds. The releases are going to take place over around 2 years. There'll be 25 released this year, two per month, and 25 released next year, two per month. And so I'll just read some of the titles. So you've got Tony Joe White, self-titled, Roy Cooder, Chicken Skin Music, George Benson, Breezin'. That's one of the first to come out, according to Chad. Great album. The original Mo-Fi did that one in the 80s. Really good album. KC and the Sunshine Band, self-titled. Mo-Fi, the new Mo-Fi, did that not too long ago. The Meters, Fire on the Bayou, wonderful album. Graham Parsons, Grievous Angel. That one's been done that one's been reissued by everyone. Rejuvenation, another Meters title, great album. The Meters were really doing some solid work at that point. Another Ry Cooder album, Paradise and Lunch. The self-titled Foghat album, the Fool for the City being their most well-known, but this one came before that. John David Souther, Black Rose. Another Ry Cooder, Paris, Texas. Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris, the Trio album. Dixie Chicken, a classic by Little Feat. Salem Shoes, another classic by Little Feat. America Homecoming, wonderful album. I think Steve Hoffman's old company, what is it, Audio Fidelity or whatever it was called, did an SACD of that. America's self-titled album. Two great ones from Seals and Crofts. You've got Summer Breeze and Diamond Girl. The original Montrose album, their debut album, great stuff there. the Ramones self-titled, his band in the street choir, Astral Weeks, and Moondance, all by the great Van Morrison. And the one that has really got a lot of people excited, Genesis Wind and Weathering, because I don't know how to say it, but who cares? You know exactly the album I'm talking about. Now, so the reason that this one is really interesting is it's never got the audiophile treatment in any kind. Classic Records did the audiophile treatment to most of the Peter Gabriel years records, and over the last sort of 3 years, feels like a lifetime, as part of another series, the Atlantic 75 series, Analog Productions did not only most of the Peter Gabriel era albums, but a number of the Phil Collins era albums, A Trick of the Tail, Abacab, and the Shapes album. But Wind and Weathering is one that's never got the audiophile treatment. Yes, there's an SACD version, but of that highly compressed remix. Nothing from the original mix except the original LPs, which, except for the Japanese pressing, are very lacking in bass. And even the Japanese pressing isn't great. It's just the best of the bunch. The original CD pressing's even worse than the LPs. In 1994, probably the best version, along with the best digital version, certainly probably the best overall, with the exception of the original Japanese LP. And this was part of the entire remastering of the Genesis catalog. But what makes me wonder about what is on that master tape is because the other Genesis records, with the exception of, and then there were three, which was recorded just after Wind and Weathering, sound fine in their original CD versions and most of the original LP versions in 1994 when they remastered most of the catalog. Wind and Weathering, though, even on its best pressings, sounds somewhat lacking in the bass. So you can't blame it all on, the American and European pressings weren't as good as the Japanese, because even the Japanese isn't that great on the bass department. And you can't necessarily blame it on poor digital to analog converters or analog to digital converters in the early age of the CD, because even the remastered version of the CD is lacking a bit in the bass compared to the other titles remastered at that same time by the same mastering engineer on the same equipment. So it'll be very interesting to see what Analog Productions is able to do with this title. Will they go the MoFi route and do really accentuate the bass, and to balance it out, accentuate the treble? Will they leave it the way it is? Will they do some moderate EQing? It will be really interesting to see the mastering choices, and it will be very interesting to know who the engineer is, because Matt Luthen's a great engineer, is slated to do the mastering on almost all of these titles, but not necessarily all, which begs the question, will he be doing the Genesis title, Wind and Weathering? And based on the early announcement, they're also doing Duke, which doesn't have those bass problems that Wind and Weathering does, in my view. It's got other quirks. And so the reason I ask whether Matt is doing it or not is because all of the other Genesis titles that Analog Productions has released have been mastered by Chris Bellman. And the classic records versions of the Peter Gabriel titles that came out 20 years ago or so, maybe more, those, I think more than 25 at this point, those were mastered by Chris Bellman as well. So to keep things consistent, will Wind and Weathering this year and Duke next year be mastered by Chris Bellman, or will they hand those over to Matthew Luthens, who's doing the rest of the series? I don't know. These are the questions that keep me up at night. Not really, but they're interesting questions, certainly to me. And so that's one of the questions. And Chad has admitted that he's been blown away by the high demand for the Genesis titles, both from the Atlantic 75 series and now that the pre-orders are open for this, because it's just, he said in several interviews recently, it's not necessarily a band that he had been paying much attention to when they were the it thing. But the sales of the Genesis titles they did in the previous series, and the buzz around the ones in this series, just absolutely blew him away. Which shows you that they're not one of these bands the critics ever like, but who cares what the critics think? They're even more irrelevant than they were before because of the internet. But it's one of those bands with a kind of cult following who apparently care about listening to the music in as pardon me, pardon me, in as high a quality as possible. and they're more than willing to do what it takes to acquire both the highest quality LPs and SACDs. Because again, if I didn't say this before, just like it was with the Atlantic 75, these new ones will have a super audio CD and direct from tape to DSD, as will the LPs that certainly in the case of the Genesis one, and most of the others cut from analog tape directly. So again, it will be interesting to see what is really on that master tape when either Chris Bellman or Matt Luthens gets their hands on it. And from there, what decisions are they going to make? I mean, the whole series, I think, is interesting. And it does bring up the question of why does everything in the audiophile world move so slow? And a lot of people, I think, unfairly blame Chad, Chad Kassem, for those who don't know, the owner of Acoustic Sounds Analog Productions. They blame him or they blame the guys at MoFi, but it really is the fault of the major labels and their legal team, and occasionally, though rarely, the artists themselves. Because in order for a specialty audiophile label like Analog Productions, like Mobile Fidelity, to release a title, they need to license the master tape. Well, they need to acquire it and then have a license to be able to reproduce it on records, SA, CDs, what have you. And that used to not be the biggest deal because the record industry used to be huge. They only cared about the latest and greatest. Legacy artists, meaning old artists, weren't all that much of a concern. They might throw out a greatest hits collection every now and then, but beyond that, the major labels just didn't care all that much. As the record industry collapsed, progressive free fall collapse with a bit of thermite thrown in this century, they started to realize that one of the only ways they could actually move product is by digging into the catalogs of the legacy artists and having the super deluxe, super ultra mega deluxe, and so deluxe that you need to actually live inside Pandora's box just to be able to gaze upon how deluxe the edition is. And for the last maybe 10, maybe more years, the major labels have been doing that. Now they realize that one of the ways to deluxeify and megafy and ultrafy a release by legacy artist is by coming out with a specific audiophile edition done in a very similar quality to those one would expect from labels like MoFi and like Analog Productions. So enter series like the Rhino Hi-Fi series, where it's high quality, quiet vinyl, beautiful jackets, and mastered by the mastering engineers associated with Analog Productions and some of these others that are at the top of their craft. People like Kevin Gray, people like Matt Luthens. And so, because of that, they are being much more selective with what they allow the smaller labels, the specialty labels who invented this whole audiophile thing, certainly in the rock, pop, and soul world. They're being more selective with what they let them license. And they're giving them various provisos that didn't exist before. So, for instance, they're even if they want to, because there's an argument about 33 and a third RPM LPs versus 45 RPM LPs. If you know half of the stuff I'm referencing in a video that I promise most on my channel aren't going to like at all, if they even like any of the other stuff, they're not going to like this one. But if you know, you know. So anyway, there's an argument about whether if you make the record spin faster and have less sort of crowded real estate by the inner groove, if it sounds better, or whether if that's a gimmick and the good old original 33 and a third record is the best. While those arguments happen in terms of quality, something else is happening in terms of what the labels will actually allow these companies to do. For instance, they are not really licensing many 33 and a third RPM. So they're saying, okay, you guys can do this Genesis title, you guys can do this Seals and Crofts title, etc., but it has to be in obscure formats. So we'll let you do it in the 45 RPM LP because that counts as obscure. We'll let you do it on SACD, which is a great format, but these days probably even more obscure. And when it comes to the good old tried and true, everyone has heard of it, 30, pardon me, 33 and a third album. We are going to release it as a Rhino title or as some other thing that is in-house in our own labels. And so not only are they limiting what these specialty labels can actually release, but they're also being much more stringent about what, when, and how they can be released. So all of these delays are super frustrating. In some cases, like with the SACD delay last year, it's a production issue. But because MoFi and Analog Productions own their own record pressing plants, for most of these delays, it isn't even a matter of I just need to reply to something. So excuse me. It isn't even a matter of that. It's really a matter of legal entanglements, because the greed of the music industry may have somewhat gone, because the music industry itself is not what it used to be, and that could well be a good thing. But that at an essential metaphysical level, the industry still cares about the bottom line more than it cares about the customer, and certainly more than it cares about the artist, and certainly more than it cares about these smaller labels. That said, on an individual level, some of the people that are working at these labels and dealing with your MoFis and your Analog Productions, they love the stuff. They love the specialty labels. They love the audiophile world. But nevertheless, the industry still being an industry, while a shadow of itself, they are still responsible for all of these delays in through this convoluted pipeline of licensing agreements and other restrictions that can make the time and space between the desired date of an album's release by a specialty label and the actual release very, very elongated indeed. But I'm really happy Chad is doing what he's doing. It is not his fault that these delays are happening. Um, Maybe he could have saved the announcement till closer to the time, but then again, the first in the series are going out this month. So I guess it really is at the right time. I just hope that these record labels get it together and that maybe the regulatory environment tilts a bit more in the favor of, at some point, of these specialty labels as opposed to the majors. But when has that ever happened? So great interview. I put the link in my description here, so you can go to Steve's channel and check it out. As always, like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.